Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to another edition of PT on Ice. My name is Jason London, and I am lead faculty with the Institute for Clinical Excellence. I teach both rehabilitation of the injured runner and rehabilitation of the injured cyclist. And today's topic that I'm going to talk about is, are stronger runners harder to kill? Meaning, are stronger runners more resilient to injury and less likely to sustain a running related injury? So as we know, running injuries are really prevalent, particularly in a novice running population. And what I want to talk about today is, why is that? We know that training load plays a large factor in why someone might develop a running related injury, particularly if they're increasing their training volume too quickly too soon. However, why are novice runners at more risk than more experienced runners? Is it because they haven't developed the load capacity, meaning their bodies have not adapted to the stresses of running to be able to sustain a relatively high training load with running, and therefore they get injured? So there's a really neat paper that was published just this past month in the Journal of Science and Sports Medicine, entitled Project Run 21. Do running experience and running pace influence the risk of running injury? A 14-week prospective cohort study by Kama Damsted et al. And if this study sounds a little familiar, it's because I presented another paper from the same study a month or two ago that was in the Journal of Orthopedic Sports Physical Therapy, or JOSPT. And that one was more looking at progression of running volume and how that affected the rate of injury. But today this study is looking at the effect of running speed and one's average running volume on injury. So this is a neat study. It's prospective, meaning that we can infer cause and effect and not just do a correlate injury and the things that they're studying. And it's neat also because it's has a fairly large sample size. So they took just under 600 runners and had them start a training plan for a half marathon. And they did one of two different training plans. They either did a volume-based training plan or more of a pace-based training plan. All of these runners were healthy at the beginning of the study, and then they followed these runners over the course of that training plan and then subsequent half marathon race, and looked at the rate of injury as well as what factors may have influenced that rate of injury. They also all the subjects had GPS wearables that they were wearing, so they could really track pace and volume accurately. And then they dichotomized the data into two different groups to analyze this question: is, do runners who typically run a little faster and run a little bit more volume per week have less injuries than those who run slower and run less volume? So they dichotomized them into two different groups, with the higher volume group running more than 9 miles a week, and the lower volume group running less than 9 miles a week. They came up with that cutoff based on some previous research that they had done. And then they really kind of indicated that the higher volume group were more experienced runners and the lower volume group were less experienced runners. And we'll get into that in a moment. And then for running speed, the cutoff was a 10-minute mile. So those who run faster than a 10-minute mile on average during their training were in the fast group, and those who ran slower than a 10-minute mile were in the slow group. And at the end of the study, what they found, or the results were, that those runners who were in the high volume group, so those runners who were running more than 9 miles a week, and those runners that were running faster, so those runners that were running faster than a 10-minute mile on average, were less likely to become injured than those runners who are running less than 9 miles a week and running slower than a 10-minute mile. And interestingly, their cutoff of saying this higher volume group was more experienced and the lower volume group was less experienced did pan out. So the lower volume group had an average running experience of 3 years, whereas the higher volume group had an average running experience of 6 years. Overall, there was a 20% rate or incidence of a running-related injury. So a little bit less than we typically see in the literature, where some studies show up to 75% incidence, but it definitely falls within the range there. So how do we take this data or this study and apply it to our clinical setting? So the answer to the question is, are stronger runners harder to kill? And the answer is yes. So the runners who are running have more exposure to the training load and are running a little faster are perhaps getting a better training stimulus. So therefore their body is adapting to the rigors of running. And perhaps they are building better resiliency to running-related injury. So when we're working with runners in the clinic, we do a lot of patient education, and part of our treatment is helping runners to develop proper training plans. And so taking that into account and thinking that, okay, on average, we want our runners to be running more than 9 miles per week and running a little bit faster, so running faster than a 10-minute mile, which I think is reasonable. With a lot of recreational runners and competitive runners, you're going to see running volumes much higher than 9 miles per week and running speed much faster than 10-minute miles. So it's definitely achievable, and I think this is, like I said, an interesting study. It adds, it's kind of a unique spin on some things to add to the literature, and really looking at more at the load capacity of a runner versus just looking at the load that is placed on a runner. So thank you for your time. Have a happy Friday, healthy Friday, and I'll be at the Ice Sampler next weekend in Vegas. It's going to be a great time, really good topics, great speakers, and as always, really good community events. So there's going to be some rock climbing, high intensity interval training, and then a sunrise hike/run as well, and also some social events. But it'll be a great learning opportunity for the weekend, as well as some fun. So join us. Head over to ptonice.com to find the details. And if you can't make it there, I'll be teaching rehabilitation of the injured runner in Helena, Montana at the end of April for the Montana chapter of the APTA. If you haven't been to Helena, it's a beautiful spot, and they have a great network of trails for running and mountain biking. Have a great Friday.